NC Pork, good for the plate, great for the state. The bracket is out, the field of 68 is set, and across the bold North State, basketball fans are getting ready for the greatest 3 weeks in sports. Here in North Carolina, that excitement comes with something extra, of course, our combination that is absolutely fantastic, bacon and basketball. North Carolina's pork industry supports more than 42,000 jobs and generates more than $11 billion of economic impact, making it the largest agricultural sector in the state. You might say they're raising the bacon and raising the bar, and they're helping us celebrate March Madness again this year with our third annual Bacon and Basketball Bracket Mayhem Challenge on Yahoo Sports. You could win free bacon for a year from NC Pork and take home cool prizes from our new partner this year in this endeavor, Stitch Golf. Dress your game. All you have to do is go to Yahoo Sports Bracket Mayhem and click to join a group and use group ID 14348. That's Yahoo Sports Bracket Mayhem group ID 14348. You can join right up into the first games that tip on Thursday. And without any further ado, we have to get into talking about this incredible basketball journey. And joining me, as always, is longtime ACC journalist David Glenn. And David, that bracket came out on Sunday night. The field of 68 has been revealed. And when you step back and look at the tournament as a whole, what are your overall impressions of this year's field?
Well, number one, given that we are the North Carolina Sports Network, I'm excited that we, as a state, have 5 participants. 3 from the ACC, we've been talking about on this show all year long. Number 1 seed Duke, but also North Carolina and NC State. But we also got High Point out of the Big South again. And for the first time in program history, we have Queen's University of Charlotte, winners of the Atlantic Sun. The most our state has ever had in any NCAA tournament, Mike, is 6 teams. So we knocked on the door of that number this year before ending up with 5. But all 5 of those stories in different ways are intriguing. And of course, the Blue Devils from our backyard are among the favorites to win the whole thing. Similarly, the Atlantic Coast Conference that, as you mentioned, I've been covering so closely for 39 years now, got 8 invitations this year. That's a really big deal after several years in a row where, even though the league has grown to 18 members, it had only gotten 4 or 5 NCAA tournament bids. That affects your image as a league, but it also, remember, affects your bottom line financially, because each of these bids is worth millions of dollars, and each victory in the big dance is worth millions of dollars more directly for a team's individual conference. So the ACC needed to take a step forward in March Madness, and it has done so, at least on the front end, with these 8 invitations. Another thing that jumps out is that the number 1 seeds look very, very strong again in this year's bracket. Remember that last year was only the second time ever that all 4 number 1 seeds ultimately made it to the Final Four, with Florida and Houston and Duke and Auburn all pulling that off. This year's quartet of Duke and Arizona and Michigan and Florida looks similarly dominant in many ways, although the Wolverines and the Gators both fell short in their respective conference tournaments over this past weekend. I personally will not have all those 4 top seeds in my Final Four this year, but it's certainly a possibility for the second year in a row. I do especially like Duke in the East Regional. I especially like Arizona in the West Regional, whereas I think the South and the Midwest are much harder to predict. So I look forward to getting into the details of the 4 quadrants, if you will, as well as the details for the most and least dangerous teams in the ACC, and what kind of chances I think High Point and Queens have as they have the second and first trip to the big dance in the history of those programs, respectively.
Well, let's talk about Queens and High Point. High Point going back for a second year in a row under Flynn Clayman, but Grant Leonard's Queens Royals, this is their first year they have ever been eligible to play in the tournament, and they're in there. And hey, we have both Flynn Clayman and Grant Leonard right here with David Glenn interviews. And DG, I tell you, both of these guys came across as very likable guys that you want to cheer for here in the month of March.
Yeah, Buddy the Street Dog is going to become famous this week. That's part of the culture of Queens basketball. And Flynn Clayman, part of his story is that his wife is also a college basketball coach. They're both at High Point, but they have a young child, another child on the way. Given the chaotic nature of coaches' schedules, that's one heck of a family affair. So we do dive into the basketball with both Grant Leonard and Flynn Clayman. Coach Clayman, of course, was one of Alan Huss's top assistants last year when the High Point Panthers got their first ever bid to the Division I NCAA Tournament. Both interesting guys. Flynn Clayman happens to be a 6'8" former professional basketball player. Coach Leonard has roots in Chicago and Wisconsin and is a really down-to-earth, easy-to-talk-to guy who has not only Buddy the Street Dog, but he's become famous for some of his ugly sweaters. I use that term as one of endearment, but he's an easy-to-talk-to guy, doesn't seem to take himself too seriously, and we had a lot of fun with both of those guys. I think, Mike, even though they got a zillion media requests, I'm pretty sure after you carved up all the audio and video, they spent basically 30 minutes with me each during what both admitted was the most chaotic time of their entire careers. So we are thankful to both coaches and their schools for setting that up and for choosing us at the North Carolina Sports Network for one of their longest interviews in each case.
Let's focus in on the Royals of Queen University first. They're located right in downtown Charlotte, man. A lot of people around Charlotte didn't even know that Queens was a Division I program. But the Royals right here transitioning from Division II powerhouse to D1, and now they're already dancing as a 15 seed, opening up against number 2 Purdue. What has Grant Leonard built culturally inside that program that allowed them to make this jump so quickly?
Well, first, they've been able to offer stability at Queens because remember, Grant Leonard was at Queens for 10 years as an assistant coach under a guy named Bart Lundy, who took Queens to 2 Final Fours at the Division II level, a bunch of Sweet 16s. Coach Lundy is now at Milwaukee in the Horizon League as the head coach there. But Grant Leonard gets promoted from an assistant at Queens after, again, a full decade learning that culture. Now he's in his 4th season as the head coach of the Royals. They've also been able to sell winning there. As you said, Division II powerhouse previously. And now they've become one of the best programs in the Atlantic Sun Conference at the Division I level. They were picked to win the league, remember, in the preseason by the coaches in the ASUN. So they were among the first to see this coming through the eyes of actual coaches. Coach Grant Leonard and his staff also offer a really fun offensive style. Most recruits love to run, they love to score, and Queens had the most efficient offense in the Atlantic Sun this season when the Royals were also one of the fastest-paced teams in that league. Yet somehow they don't turn the ball over very much, which is unusual for a team that likes to get out and run. Last thing, 4 of Coach Leonard's top 8 players are returnees from last year. That is unusual at a mid-major program, especially in the transfer portal era, where if you play well, somebody probably poaches you from one of the bigger leagues. Half of Grant Leonard's rotation has been with him for multiple years, and the Royals star guard on the wing, Chris Ashby, has actually been with Coach Leonard for 4 years, kind of the Seth Trimble story at UNC. And he's put his name, Ashby has, all over the Queens men's basketball record books, especially as a gifted three-point shooter. Coach Leonard says his practice pace, I believe was Coach's phrase. Chris Ashby's practice pace is as good or better than anyone Coach Leonard has experienced in his multiple decades as a coach at the college level. I also think, Mike, you mentioned the city of Charlotte. I think that's a selling point. It is one of the fastest growing cities in the entire United States and has been for a long time. For those who haven't been there, the Queens campus is in the Myers Park area of Charlotte, which is a really nice area. It's also not too far from where you and I just were at the ACC tournament in what they call Uptown Charlotte. Most cities use the phrase downtown. Charlotte calls it uptown. But there's a lot of intriguing selling points in that Queens Royals mix, some specific to basketball, some specific to Grant Leonard and his staff, some specific to the Queen City, where one of the Queens players is actually the younger brother of longtime Charlotte Hornets player Trey Mann in the NBA. So there's a whole lot of fun angles to dissect, and we dove into a lot of them with Coach Leonard very recently. So we hope folks will check that out here on our YouTube channel, which now has 66,000 plus subscribers and keeps growing. So don't forget to click that subscribe button if you haven't already.
You talk about the Queen City, Dave, and man, Charlotte's the biggest metro area in either Carolina. And right now they have UNC Charlotte, Davidson, and Queens that are Division I programs right there. And you'd really think that one of these programs would take a massive step forward. Obviously, UNC Charlotte has found a little bit of stability lately with their coaching situation. Davidson, after Bob McKillop to the younger McKillop, really not finding their foothold right there in the Atlantic 10. And now Grant Leonard is coming up, and this guy has a lot of energy. And he's also in a league that he ought to be able to compete for a championship every year in the Atlantic Sun. It certainly is shaping up that maybe Charlotte, with the also inclusion of the Charlotte Hornets of the NBA, they ought to be taking more of a basketball presence here in the Bold North State.
Yeah, I think you're right, because remember, success is, of course, largely what you do to contribute to success as a team, as a university, as an individual, but it's also your neighborhood, right? How do you compare to those in your neighborhood, especially? And the Atlantic Sun Conference has had a lot of turnover. For those who may not be as avid college basketball fans, the A-Suns champions, in let's just say the last decade or two, have included Belmont. They left the league for the Missouri Valley. East Tennessee State, now a member of the Southern Conference. Kennesaw State, now a member of Conference USA. Liberty, now a member of Conference USA. And Mercer, which is now a member of the Southern Conference. So in that context, with some of those former champions moving out, and the Queens Royals, of course, moved in from the Division II level 4 years ago. Fun fact, they weren't eligible under NCAA rules for the big dance their first 3 years. And originally, Mike, they were not going to be eligible this year. They had to file an appeal, not recently, but they had to file an appeal a while back to say, hey, we should be eligible for the postseason come 2026. They won that appeal. Had they not, we would not have that great story to celebrate. We would not have 5 teams from the Bold North State, as you like to call it, in this 2026 big dance. So I'm glad they won that appeal. They obviously capitalized. They have a fun offense to watch, and we'll get into the details a little bit more later. I think Queens has a more difficult round of 64 challenge than High Point has. They're both going to be underdogs, but I think one of those two settings is much different than the other, and we'll probably dive into those two stories in more detail along with the ACC angles a little bit later.
DG, let's talk about High Point now, and the Panthers have quietly become one of the more stable and successful mid-major programs in the region. This is the Panthers' second NCAA tournament appearance in program history, back-to-back years, as they enter a number 12 seed this year after winning the Big South Championship for a second year in a row and drawing number 5 Wisconsin in Portland. Flynn Clayman, the first-year head coach of the Panthers, as High Point won its third straight outright Big South regular season title, went 15-1 in league play, and carried a 27-4 regular season record into March. Clayman also became the first head coach in Big South history since 1998-99 to win the league tournament in his first year. And one of the things that Flynn has emphasized is that this is not a one-star team. It is a deep group. It is a together group that can hurt you with balance and toughness and different guys stepping up on different nights. When you look at this matchup between the Panthers and Wisconsin, what stands out about Flynn Clayman as a head coach, and what gives High Point, as you said earlier, a little bit better chance to be a dangerous team in this tournament in that 12-5 game?
Well, it's funny, Mike, the way you asked that question, what stands out? This is a little bit trivial, and then I'll answer the rest of the question. But Flynn Clayman was listed as 6'9" when he was a professional basketball player. Off the top of your head, you sat next to me at the ACC tournament, right? A lot of coaches are former players, right? But we stood right next to or right behind on Media Row in Charlotte Ryan Odom of Virginia, not a tall man. John Shire, former guard. He's a tall man, but not supersized, right? Hubert Davis of Carolina, a former UNC guard, a tall man, former NBA player, but not a giant, right? When you say what stands out about Flynn Clayman, if you've never stood next to him or shaken his hand, the dude is at least 6'8". And I'm not sure we saw anybody of that size, did we? Jay Lucas of Miami is a smaller guy. Pat Kelsey of Louisville is a smaller guy. We just saw 15 head coaches in the ACC. And I'm trying to think, nobody jumps out to me as somebody who is truly striking with his size when you say hello. So one of the things that stands out about Coach Clayman is he's 6'8" or so. So be ready for that. I mentioned his wife is also a college basketball coach. That family craziness also stands out. But in the basketball sense specifically, and with this team, the first thing that jumps out about High Point this year on the court is the team's offensive efficiency. As Coach Clayman said in his recent visit to the David Glenn Show, anyone who wants to argue about the importance of the three-point shot in the modern game is fighting basic mathematics and essentially inviting some version of their own basketball disappointment or demise. The High Point Panthers defend the three-point shot really well, and they shoot the three-point shot well, with 6 of their top 9 players at around 35% or better from beyond the stripe. Their senior wing guard, Chase Johnston, who's kind of become a social media sensation during his career with the Panthers, he hits nearly half of his three-point shots. And this year's Panthers have so much quality depth, Mike, in this second of 2 straight years going to the big dance, that Chase Johnston usually comes off the bench this year after usually starting a year ago. So that's one indicator that maybe this group is even better than last year's group. Whether under Coach Alan Huss the previous 2 years or Coach Clayman and his staff this year, the Panthers have a very strict set of analytic guidelines when it comes to efficiency. In the Big South this year, the Panthers created the most turnovers with their defense, but committed the fewest turnovers on offense. That is a very rare efficiency bonanza that the Panthers have going for them, along with that three-point differential. Last season, High Point ranked behind only the Duke Blue Devils and the Gonzaga Bulldogs in raw offensive efficiency. And this year, they're in the top 5 nationally in scoring at roughly 90 points per game. Now, whereas I, again, do not think Queens has a great chance of winning as a 15 seed against number 2 seed Purdue, I honestly do believe that High Point, which got some respect with a 12 seed, that's a reflection of that great record that you outlined, Mike. I do think the Panthers have a legitimate chance of upsetting Wisconsin in that round of 64. It should be a lot of fun to watch in both cases, but in terms of advancing, don't roll your eyes at the idea that High Point could get to the round of 32 this year after really competing with Purdue in that round of 64 1 year ago.
While High Point has made the tournament in back-to-back years, another team in the triad, Big Four member Wake Forest, has not made the tournament. Next up, we're going to talk about NC State, North Carolina, and Duke. But I'd be remiss, David, if I didn't ask you about Steve Forbes and Wake Forest. They're again going to the National Invitation Tournament. They will play in that 32-team bracket coming up in a first-round game at 7 o'clock on Wednesday night against the Naval Academy. They're left out again. And for Wake Forest fans, while they have a lot of optimism right now about their football program, and Jake Dickert, they really long, they thirst for that March Madness experience that everybody became so commonplace with 30 years ago with Dave Odom. Man, it's hard to believe that was 30 years ago, but that's really the last time that Wake Forest was truly continually relevant in basketball. Before we talk about the rest of the Big Four, what can you tell us about the future and the present right now, the immediate present for Steve Forbes and the Demon Deacons?
Well, he just finished his 6th year and he missed the NCAA tournament for the 6th straight year. And whereas everybody likes him and everybody respects his track record previously as a junior college head coach and also at East Tennessee State as a championship winning coach, if you go 0 for 6 in the big dance invitations in your first 6 years, you are by definition on the hot seat. In fact, there's only 2 coaches in ACC history, or I'll call it modern ACC history, because the big bracket was not only this 64/68 team monstrosity, but let's just say from the mid 80s until now, there have only been 3 coaches retained by their school after missing the NCAA tournament in each of their first 6 years. And the details are telling because one of those 2 coaches was Jim Christian at Boston College. What happened? He was retained. He's in his 7th year. He still missed the big dance and he was fired. But the only other example is the one that I think Wake Forest Athletic Director John Curry and the rest of the Wake Forest administration is clinging to. And that is the other guy who missed the NCAA tournament for the first 6 years of his tenure at an ACC school within these past 40 years was Leonard Hamilton at Florida State. And what are the similarities? Well, just as you mentioned, Wake is playing in the NIT this year again. Florida State made a whole bunch of NITs in those first 6 years under Leonard Hamilton, even as they were falling short of their dreams of making the big dance. He was retained because he was recruiting well, he was sending players to the NBA, and he was making the postseason, even if not making the big dance. Well, Florida State was rewarded for its patience because Leonard Hamilton essentially went on to become the greatest coach in Florida State basketball history. I mean, his jersey is in the rafters with a win total that is sky high because he stayed another decade plus after being on the hot seat but retained after those first 6 years. Steve Forbes is out there recruiting, sometimes with Juke Harris, his star player, next to him, right? That sounds like Wake Forest is going to make sure that their star sophomore, Juke Harris, from here in Salisbury, North Carolina, is going to remain with the Demon Deacons. Well, if you make sure you get enough revenue sharing money and name, image, likeness money to Juke Harris such that he stays, and that suggests that you have enough other money in your budget to attract a higher caliber group of transfers than the Deeks were able to attract this past year. And that is why in the modern era, I think schools are more likely to stay a little patient if they believe a guy can coach. Pitt retained Jeff Capel for year 9, even though he's made only one NCAA tournament in his first 8 years. Why? Because they think he can coach. They know he has a good recruiting class on the way, and they're going to up their budget for men's basketball so he can recruit a better class of transfers. These options weren't available 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. So Wake obviously believes that Steve Forbes can be the guy with better personnel. He had a bad first year. He had a bad 6th year, finishing 13th in an 18-team ACC. But most of the time he has made the postseason. Juke Harris is a heck of a guy to build around. He has some high school players committed for next year, and obviously they have the plan to empty the bucket in the transfer portal. When Steve Forbes had more talent, he was right on the NCAA bubble. I mean, one of the first 4 teams out when he had Hunter Salas at guard and Efton Reed in the post and good players on the wing like Cameron Hildreth, etc. The big guy who transferred to Kentucky, Andrew Carr, was a good player as well. He was oh so close, like Leonard Hamilton was oh so close several times at FSU. We'll see if Wake is rewarded for its patience the way Florida State clearly was over the next decade and beyond with Leonard Hamilton. That part is a guessing game for now. I know some Wake fans are frustrated that there was not a change made the way they were made at Boston College and Georgia Tech and Syracuse in the ACC. We're actually going to talk about those coaching searches a little bit later. But I understand in this new world why you might opt for one more year for Jeff Capel at Pitt, one more year for Steve Forbes at Wake, because recruiting is a totally different animal thanks to international players, thanks to the transfer portal, than it was for most of my lifetime covering this stuff.
When you look at being an AD in this modern era, sometimes not doing something is the right move. And certainly John Curry, the athletics director at Wake Forest, playing that waiting game. Now, a year ago, Boo Corrigan, the AD at NC State, he didn't have patience anymore. And that was only a year after Kevin Keatts took the Wolfpack to that 2024 Final Four and just got everybody in Wolfpack Nation excited. But NC State here in 2026, well, they're one of the last four in. So the path starts in Dayton as a number 11 seed for NC State against Texas in the first four. And if the Pack can survive that one, they immediately turn around and face number 6 seed BYU in Portland. Now, this is NC State's opportunity right here to come out and make everybody forget about what the last month has been. When the team enters the bracket this way, on a down note, what does that path really look like? The urgency, the turnaround, and maybe even the opportunity that can come from already having a game under your belt if they get the win in Dayton as this field of 68 in our Bacon and Basketball Month tips off.
Well, it's far from ideal, to say the least, right? But just for fun, let's point out that historically speaking, there are two examples of a first four team that advanced all the way to the Final Four. VCU did it under Coach Shaka Smart in 2011, and UCLA did it under Coach Mick Cronin in 2021. To quote the legendary Lloyd Christmas from the Dumb and Dumber movie, "So you're telling me there's a chance." However, practically speaking, it is a brutal road that you just outlined there, Mike. And that's definitely the case for NC State this year. Picture this. You fly from Raleigh to Dayton for that Tuesday night game you mentioned. Then, if you beat Texas, a team that you lost to, remember, head-to-head, that was 102-97 Longhorns over Wolfpack way back around Thanksgiving. It was like a precursor of the defensive problems that State was going to have all year long. If you win Tuesday night, you got to fly immediately to Portland, Oregon, all the way out there on the left coast next to the Pacific Ocean to take on a BU squad that has an NBA lottery pick in AJ DeBonsa and is one of the top 10 offensive teams in the entire country. So as much as I personally love the Wolfpack's offensive firepower, they are one of the best three-point shooting teams in the entire country. They do have 5 or 6 guys that can really score the ball. Paul McNeil's one of the best three-point shooters in this tournament. Quadir Copeland is a dangerous and effective point guard. Darian Williams didn't live up to the hype this year, but he's a very good scorer, passer, facilitator, and has the ability to be one of the best players on the court. Van Allen Lubin, I had on my All-ACC team. I think he made honorable mention. I had him on my third-team All-ACC with Quadir Copeland. There's plenty of firepower there, and that makes the Wolfpack dangerous in a way that, let's say, the Clemson Tigers of the ACC, who have a stronger seed, I don't think are very dangerous because they just have too many problems scoring the ball. State has that part figured out to a great degree. They just have been subpar on defense, to put it nicely, all year long. Between that travel schedule, those opponents, and Coach Will Wade's own comments about having to coach effort to this group all season, I do not see a dream run for this year's Pack the way they had 2 years ago under Coach Kevin Keatts. But again, the fun factor is there because when you can score like the Wolfpack, you always have a chance. It's just hard to predict that they would win, 3 straight games, let's say, to get to the Sweet 16.
The ebbs and flow with the Wolfpack this year had been really tumultuous. And for Van Allen, now he becomes the first ever player in the history of the NCAA basketball tournament. Man, he's gotten so many first ever things. I mean, he's played for 4 different schools, basically been abandoned by schools at 2 of those 3 moves. Only North Carolina retained the head coach after he played for them, but now he's at Will Wade and NC State, and he'll be the first ever player to play in the first 4 twice. Now, I don't know if he has any plans of relocating from Raleigh or Orlando to the Metro Dayton area, but that's a basketball crazy area. And that's a great environment. I know in talking to Vin on Court Vision this year, he had nothing but great things to say about the First Four experience last year for the Tar Heels. So maybe he can have some impact on that. But you're right, man. If you're Will Wade, you just got to be shaking your head. And I think he's handled it very well this year. He could have gone off the rails more than a few times with how this team has been playing. But NC State, man, it's just like, it's kind of like you say about Dumb and Dumber. You're saying there's a chance. You see the potential there and you just wait for it to blossom up. But for whatever reason, it's not really reached that level of intensity that I know a lot of the Wolfpack fans were looking for this past season.
Yeah, the bottom line is, much like with SMU, actually, which is also one of the last teams that got into the field, ACC number 8, if you will. The Mustangs can flat out score, man. Boopy Miller is the real deal at point guard. He has veteran guards on both sides of him. They have Yigatolu, a veteran big man in the post. They have Jaden Toombs, a really talented freshman power forward. Andy Enfield in that group can put the biscuit in the basket, much like Will Wade and his group. The problem is the Mustangs can't stop people. Sometimes they can't even slow people down, much like the Wolfpack has trouble slowing people down. But if you gave me the choice going into any big dance of having an explosive offense but a questionable defense, or the reverse, I will take what SMU and NC State have. Again, given those two options, I want the offensive firepower, because the smartest coach in the world is not going to be able to create offense with his X's and O's. It's just not going to happen. At some point, you need offensively creative guys who can pass and, of course, shoot the ball well. You can do some coaching things to maximize your offense, obviously, but so much of offense is truly about individual brilliance and then over time, collective brilliance. Defense is a nice anchor to build upon, and you can build a successful regular season on it. But again, the Clemson Tigers brilliantly coached on defense. When you run into better opponents, do you have enough guys who can score the ball? Answer for the Tigers, probably not. And that's what makes the Mustangs and the Wolfpack less predictable. The downside is if they give up 100 points each and they lose, we're not going to be surprised. The upside is sometimes the other team shoots poorly. Sometimes, as Coach Wade said, the Wolfpack is getting better at the effort department. How will that translate in the NCAA tournament? Maybe better than it did at the ACC tournament. So, the good news is that the ACC starts with one of the superpowers, Duke, continues with some dangerous teams like UVA, and I think Louisville's very dangerous even as a 6th seed. And then a bunch of unpredictable stories with the Tar Heels in that mix, the Wolfpack in that mix, and others. So there's a lot of fun stories to follow, and that's different than what we've had in recent years, where maybe there was one great ACC story to follow with, I think it's 4 straight years. It was Carolina went to the Final Four, then Miami went to the Final Four, then NC State went to the Final Four, and obviously last year Duke went there. Heck, the Blue Devils were there with Carolina back in 2022 when Coach K was still coaching them. But whereas we've had these fun long runs for the ACC, we've had nothing near the depth that we're describing. And whether you're intrigued by all 8 or just 4 of those 8, that's a little bit more depth than we've had in ACC country since the COVID pandemic.
The perfect Wolfpack pregame or postgame spot this season is Sammy's Tap and Grill in West Raleigh. Just minutes from NC State, Sammy's brings more than 65 TVs, a huge menu, 44 draft beers, and an atmosphere built for Wolfpack fans. Burgers, jumbo wings, cold drafts, and all the energy of the pack. Whether you're watching the kickoff, tip-off, face-off, or just gathering with friends, that's where you want to be. Swing by 2235 Avent Ferry Road, Raleigh, and make Sammy's Tap and Grill your Wolfpack game day headquarters. Sammy's, presenting partner of the This Was Then podcast and complete coverage of the NC State Wolfpack on the North Carolina Sports Network.
Well, let's talk about those Tar Heels of Hubert Davis. They come into the NCAA tournament as a number 6 seed in the South region. They will open play Thursday in Greenville, South Carolina, not Greenville, North Carolina. That old Jim Valvano story about going to the wrong Carolina, Greenville, and still coming home with $50,000. He was that good of a fundraiser. The Tar Heels will draw VCU, Will Wade's former team, one of his former teams. The Rams are 27-7. They've won 16 of their last 17, including the Atlantic 10 tournament title. The Tar Heels now 24-8 after their early exit in the quarterfinals in Charlotte. Their 55th NCAA tournament, second all time, and Hubert Davis has Carolina back in the tournament for the fourth time in 5 seasons. What jumps out is that Carolina has already been tested, albeit early in the year, but they played 13 games against NCAA tournament teams and won the majority of those games with wins over Kansas, Kentucky, Louisville, Ohio State, Virginia, plus a split with Duke and Clemson. So when you look at this Carolina team entering this tournament, what do you see as the Tar Heels' biggest strength, and what do you see as their biggest debit? And how dangerous will Carolina really be to make a run without Caleb Wilson?
Yeah, to me, without Caleb Wilson, Carolina's biggest strength by a million miles is the junior center, Henry Veesaar. I mean, that guy was mostly a backup at Arizona for the previous 3 years. And now the 7-footer has blossomed into one of the half a dozen or so best players in the Atlantic Coast Conference in just 5 months under Hubert Davis and his staff. I actually think that should help the Tar Heels moving forward, because if you have a recruiting pitch to other potential incoming transfers when the NCAA portal opens on April 7th, and you can point to not only, Harrison Ingram of Stanford or Cormac Ryan of Notre Dame and other success stories, Brady Manick of Oklahoma in Hubert Davis's first year. I know there have been other transfers that didn't work out as well, but the salesperson in anybody shouldn't have a hard time pointing at Manick and Ingram and Cormac Ryan. And this one, to me, Henry Veesaar is one of the greatest success stories in the transfer portal in all of college basketball in recent years. When you're a backup for the most part for 3 years at one prominent program, and then you're borderline first team all ACC, and you blossom into a guy that often dominated either alongside Caleb Wilson or after Wilson's injury without the assistance of having that freshman All-American by your side. I think it's a stunningly impressive story that Carolina would be wise to use moving forward. Veesaar is coming off of a game you and I watched from Media Row courtside, career high 28 points, 17 rebounds against what is a very strong Clemson defense at the ACC tournament, where for 30-plus minutes when the Tigers were annihilating the Tar Heels, and that's not an exaggeration. I know what the final score was, but I was there to see it. The Tigers took the Heels behind the woodshed for 30-plus minutes, and Henry Veesaar seemed to be the only Carolina guy rising to the occasion for those 30-plus minutes. He can score with his back to the basket. He can beat a big man off the dribble. He's been a 40+% three-point shooter pretty much all season. He's a talented and willing passer when he gets double teamed or if he sees a teammate open at the three-point line. That makes Henry Veesaar a nightmare matchup for UNC's opponents. VCU actually has a 6'11" international big man of its own. Veesaar from Estonia originally. Djokovic is the name of the VCU big man, one of their best players, so that'll be an interesting matchup to watch. The problem for the Tar Heels, Mike, and you asked about the debit, if you will, they're never sure what they're going to get from their backcourt, and they're never sure what they're going to get from their bench. Their bench was completely invisible in the loss to Clemson at the ACC tournament. They had 4 guys come off the bench. They played collectively 30-plus minutes, and they scored 5 points and didn't really make that many plays. It's not always about scoring, but other depth players on other teams put up big numbers in block shots, big numbers in rebounds, big numbers in assists. The 4 guys who came off the bench for the Tar Heels in Charlotte, Zayden High in the front court. You had Jonathan Powell coming off the bench in the backcourt. Jaden Young was like a -13 against the Clemson Tigers in that game. And Kyan Evans, formerly the starting point guard, he just has really trailed off in his first year in a Carolina uniform. It's hard to win if you're getting nothing from your bench. And even one of the starters in that game against Clemson, Luka Bogovac, he was the star of the win over the Tigers when he hit 6 3-pointers and had a career-high 20 points. He was mostly invisible against Clemson in the rematch during the ACC tournament. So what did Hubert Davis have? He had Veesaar for 40 minutes. And then during that frantic comeback, Seth Trimble played well. The freshman point guard Derek Dixon played well. And the all-purpose two-way player Jaron Stevenson played well. You can't advance in the NCAA tournament if you only have 3 or 4 guys to rely on. The competition is just too tough. And that starts with VCU. They tied for the regular season title in the A-10. They won the A-10 tournament to grab that automatic bid. They have 2 very good players in the starting lineup that the Tar Heels have to game plan for. But this UNC defense, man, whether it was giving up 1,000 points to Abuka Okori of Stanford, or, Nick Davidson, backup center for the Clemson Tigers in the absence of their injured starting center. He goes off for a career high against the Tar Heels, or an ACC high anyway. The Heels are unpredictable on defense. They're unpredictable with their guard play, and they're unpredictable with their bench play. Are they like the Wolfpack? At their best, could they win a couple games? Yes, they could. But predicting that they'll be at their best, when if they beat VCU, a dangerous first-round opponent, they would probably have to face Illinois, which is one of the most offensively elite teams in the entire country, especially given the Heels' defensive challenges. So I know 2 years, heck, in his first year and his third year, Hubert Davis led the Tar Heels to the Sweet 16. I think he has a much more difficult task this time, and I would pick the Heels to win 1 game, but I definitely would not pick them to win 2 and punch another ticket to Hubert Davis's third Sweet 16.
Well, David, you talk about Veesaar being that guy this year for Carolina, and he certainly is. He might not be the best pro potential player. That's obviously Caleb Wilson. But Veesaar has an edge to him. The other guys that you mentioned, Manick, edge. Harrison Ingram, edge. Cormac Ryan, edge. It seems like all of the edgy guys, the guys who are those X factors, the George Lynch from 1993 when we were working with the Tar Heels and they won a national championship. You got to have one of those guys. And I think it's frustrating to a lot of Carolina fans that they don't have more of those type guys, those edge fellas out there making a difference on the court. And that's resonating in some frustration, maybe misplaced, with Hubert Davis as a coach. Is that something that they really need to focus on, I think, moving forward, to be able to get more of those types of players? Because Carolina's other transfers, man, that some of them are playing really well at other places. Some of them aren't. I mean, Tyler Nickel played for a championship yesterday for Vanderbilt. They ended up losing to Arkansas, but he was playing in the game. Elliot Cadeau was playing in the Big Ten title game. Michigan lost to Purdue, but they were in the game. Ian Jackson, he has completely faded away from the landscape of college basketball this year, and that's just a surprising demise. But Carolina needs that guy to be an edge, and Veesaar has absolutely been that. At times, maybe even feeling maybe he comes across as being a little annoyed with some of the joviality around the Carolina program. It's fun to have fun, but Veesaar is that Eastern European type that just doesn't have a lot of sense of humor or patience for the extracurricular, it seems.
Well, as our colleague here on the North Carolina Sports Network, Kerry Keating, who was the longtime head coach at Santa Clara, longtime assistant coach in the ACC and the SEC and other places that we know well, former college basketball player himself, he'll talk about fit a lot. And whether it's UNC or any other school we're talking about, it is not simply about the accumulation of talent. It's about, yes, accumulating high-end talent. You need that to win. But it's about accumulating high-end talent the way you put together pieces of a puzzle. And it should be embarrassing to Carolina that they saw the solution at starting point guard as Kyan Evans. He wasn't even a true point guard at Colorado State. He's undersized. That's not an unpredictable variable. He's gotten pushed around in the ACC, and nothing against the young man. I don't think it's an effort issue. I do think it's a poor fit issue. And if you're the Carolina Tar Heels general manager, obviously in consultation with head coach Hubert Davis and the rest of that staff, you need to blend both pieces that fit X and O wise with pieces that fit personality-wise. You would never want 6 or 8 alpha dogs in your locker room on a 15-man roster, or let's say most schools use maybe an 8 or 9-man rotation. You don't want 9 alpha dogs. Your locker room would need to send everybody to the psychiatrist at the end of the first month of practice. But you do need a blend. And it's not mere coincidence that UNC won the regular season ACC title under Hubert Davis when dogs, and I spell that word DAWGS, when dogs like Cormac Ryan and Harrison Ingram were huge parts of the rotation. You have to blend alpha personalities with others. You have to blend good guard play with good ball handling skills with good shooters, etc. And given Carolina's international brand recognition, they did get Luka Bogovac from Montenegro, and he's not a great player, but he's been a valuable shooter at times. And more credit, you know this, Mike, and you've asked about Carolina all season on our timeout show and otherwise. Hubert Davis's detractors will often downplay his resume in what I think is an unfair way. He still played in the national championship game. That's not a long list of active coaches who have done that. He still won an ACC regular season title. There are not a lot of active coaches who have done that. He has been to two Sweet 16s in his first 4 years. Again, only so many active coaches. That number might be a dozen or so. 2 Sweet 16s in the last 4 years. He has cultivated brilliant transfers like the ones I just mentioned. He and John Shire are the only 2 ACC head coaches who have signed top 15 high school recruits 4 years in a row. They have Dylan Mingo coming among others next year. They had Caleb Wilson, of course, this year. And they had Ian Jackson and Drake Powell last year and others prior to that. So it's fair to criticize Hubert Davis in a lot of ways, as we have done on this show. I just roll my eyes in today's environment where his supporters will pretend the bad stuff hasn't happened, many of them, and his critics will pretend the good stuff hasn't happened, many of them. An honest assessment, if I were called by the university president, the university athletic director, a coaching search firm, or anybody else, an honest assessment of Hubert Davis is a mixed bag. It is alarming when guys who are great at their previous schools arrive, don't do much for the Tar Heels, then leave and they're great at their next school, right? That's not a good sign. But it is a good sign when you do with Henry Veesaar what Arizona failed to do for 3 years. And these other examples that I'm talking about, high school recruiting trail, transfer portal, and otherwise. Carolina needs to set the bar in a higher place, though. Luka Bogovac is a good international signee. Why doesn't UNC sign an elite international signee every single year? Virginia found Tess de Ridder in Belgium and Johan Grunlow in Germany. Virginia's second place in the ACC. Without those 2 spring and summer additions, there is no way Virginia is second place in the ACC. And I said spring and summer. You usually build your team prior to that. In today's world, that's available on the international scene. So if Hubert Davis can continue, he's got to sign really more than one of those elite high school players every year, at least one of those elite international players every year, and then multiple high-impact transfers every year. You have to do it, and you have to fit it under your budget, whatever that might be for men's basketball. But I think his critics too often compare him to Dean Smith, Roy Williams, or the guy down the road, John Shire. Most coaches compared to those 3 alternatives are going to fail the test. You have to decide what is good enough for a relatively inexperienced head coach who has a chance to grow and continue to grow at a school he obviously loves, that is his alma mater. Nobody can question his effort, his passion, etc. I think along with his GM, they just have to be wiser with their personnel choices and with that puzzle piece approach. If they do that, maybe Hubert Davis is back in the running for another regular season title, his first ACC title, another trip to the Final Four. In today's world, that can happen on a much shorter timetable because of the international talent pipeline and because of the transfer portal to supplement what Hubert Davis has already signed out of the high school senior ranks.
When you talk about Hubert Davis and you go through his background as you just did, he reminds me of another Big Four head coach from back in the 70s. Who played at his school, who played for a legendary coach, who eventually left his coaching position because he got tired of being compared to the other people around it. And right now, Hubert Davis is going to get compared a lot to John Shire, and that's unfortunate. But what Hubert Davis is shaping up to me to look like is the 21st century edition of Norman Sloan, who played for Everett Case, who couldn't get over the hump, who won a national championship in 1974, multiple ACC tournament championships, but he couldn't get away from Dean Smith. And then lo and behold, Bill Foster comes up and they play for a title at Duke in 1978, losing to Kentucky in St. Louis. But then Mike Krzyzewski comes in and he's going, I got to get the hell out of here. I'm going back to Florida. And it just seems like Hubert Davis, man, he's up against the wall. And you're exactly right in talking about the international recruits. One of the big selling points that Carolina's athletics director, Bubba Cunningham, said in introducing Jim Tanner along with Hubert Davis was that he had these great international connections. Heck, the guy gets a $100,000 bonus for either signing a 4-star or a 5-star player or making the NCAA tournament. I mean, this is crazy. But if there is one guy that I would look at as severely being in the crosshairs right now of Carolina fans, is Jim Tanner. You never hear from the guy except when he's on state-supported media over there by the Carolina Insider Pod. And, congratulations for that. But he doesn't take questions. He mostly operates in the shadows. And I would think that he is really on the clock this year to figure out who they're going to bring back from this 25-26 roster and who they're going to move on from and then try to replenish that roster. It's a tough time for the Tar Heels right now. But let's move on. We can talk about Carolina all day. Let's talk about Duke. And the Blue Devils roll into the NCAA tournament as the number 1 overall seed after winning the ACC regular season and the tournament championships. We've been all over this, how Duke athletics right now is really on a roll. They've won women's basketball, men's basketball, football, women's basketball, men's basketball. That will never be repeated again. And Duke, under John Shire, they have to feel pretty good about where they are, but without Caleb Foster and with some other players banged up on the roster for the Blue Devils, man, this could be a pretty trepidatious trip to the field of 68.
Yeah, the starting point, obviously, for Duke is the National Player of the Year, Cameron Boozer. I voted for him in my U.S. Basketball Writers Association ballot. I voted for him when Mike DeCourcy, our old friend from the Sporting News, asked me to be a part of his All-American committee this year. And I think Cameron Boozer is going to sweep this year's National Player of the Year awards. There's a lot of organizations that give them. It's not just one award. Some years there's 3 or 4 different guys who win various NPOY awards. Cameron Boozer probably will sweep this year the way Cooper Flagg either came close to or swept everything last year as Duke's star freshman. Cameron Boozer, big-time scorer, great rebounder, fantastic passer, great three-point shooter, strong free throw shooter, smart defender, and the guy carries himself, as you and I saw with our front row seat at the Spectrum Center in Charlotte, with an absolutely unflappable, calm demeanor that I think calms his teammates at stressful times, including his brother, Caden Boozer, who has far less experience as a high-end college player than Cameron does. Cameron was the MVP in Charlotte. I had a ballot. I voted for him. I know he had a tough shooting night in that championship game against Virginia, thanks to the brilliant defense of Ugo Onyenso. But guess what? Cameron Boozer found a way, even though he was limited by one of the best defensive players in the entire ACC. He ended up with 8 assists on a night where he just wasn't scoring as efficiently as he usually does. He's the MVP. But Caden Boozer also made that all-tournament team. The other most important elements for Duke right now are that their starting center, Patrick Gongba, you mentioned, we saw him in a boot in Charlotte, is coming back from his lower body injury. And the 2 freshmen, Caden Boozer and Nick Hymenia, showed a lot of improvement at the ACC tournament, which should boost their confidence and Coach John Shire's confidence in them heading into the NCAA tournament. Earlier this year, when Duke lost at Carolina, John Shire's confidence level in Nick Hymenia was such that he only played him for a couple minutes in that loss to the Tar Heels. If Duke had lost to Florida State rather than beating the Seminoles by 1 bucket, and Caden Boozer had been coming off that bad performance against the Seminoles, he did not look ready for the heat of the moment in that game against a Florida State team with some really good guards. If that had been Caden Boozer's mindset going into the big dance, Duke would have been in some trouble. because Caleb Foster, starting point guard, is not coming back anytime soon, if at all. Instead, Hymenia is a better version of himself because of how he played in Charlotte, and Caden Boozer goes from the horrible performance against FSU to really good back-to-back performances against Clemson and Virginia in the semifinals and the championship game. Caden Boozer's first half, as John Shire said at the post-game press conference, he put the Blue Devils on his back. Caden Boozer put the Devils on his back in the first half. And what do smart players do? He knows he's not a great three-point shooter during his rookie year. He might be someday. He needs a different growth curve, obviously, than Cameron Boozer, who's already elite and already headed into the NBA lottery. Caden Boozer is going to have a different growth curve. Well, as a freshman, he's not an elite ball handler, so Duke uses a bunch of different guys to handle ball handling skills, including big brother Cameron Boozer. He's not an elite three-point shooter, so what did he do against Clemson and against Virginia? He drove to the basket. He put the ball on the floor. He tried to beat his man off the dribble. He had back-to-back career highs with 16 points against the Tigers and the Cavaliers, again, in the immediate aftermath of playing not but flat out poorly against Florida State in the quarterfinals. That was an enormous step forward for the Duke basketball team that's going to continue to miss Caleb Foster at the all-important point guard position. We know that Dame Sarr and Malik Brown are all over the court elite defenders, so that's part of Duke's anchor in the big dance. They've been playing among the best defense in the entire country all year long. We know they have the National Player of the Year. We know they have Isaiah Evans, who far more often than not delivers the goods as a three-point scorer and an off-the-bounce scorer on the wing. Occasionally, Duke gets vulnerable when he has cold shooting nights, but if that's one of your worst problems, your list of problems is a lot better than everybody else's problems. We know that Gongba, when healthy, is a really effective two-way player. We know that Cam Boozer is the best player on the court in every college game he plays. The X factor for Shire is whether they get confident, competent play from their 6th and 7th and 8th players, especially Caden Boozer. If Caden plays as poorly as he did against Florida State again, Duke could lose, not early in this tournament, but when the competition gets tougher in the Sweet 16 and beyond. If Caden plays as well as he did against Clemson and UVA in Charlotte, that's a Duke bonanza. Duke has won, remember, the NCAA title with guys like Bobby Hurley at point guard, All-American, or the combination of All-American Jay Williams and backup Chris Duhon back in 2001. They both went on to play in the NBA as well. Or the combination of veteran John Shire next to veteran Nolan Smith back in 2010 when Coach K and the Blue Devils cut down the nets. Or the combination of the true freshman Tyus Jones, but the savvy senior Quinn Cook. That was the point guard combination in 2015. Now, you and I, Mike, on the sidelines would love to have Bobby Hurley or any of those other three variations at point guard on Coach K's 5 NCAA title teams. They were either elite players, Jay Williams, Bobby Hurley, etc., or at worst, they were confident, they were reliable, they were tough, they were dependable. Can Caden Boozer be those things for this year's Blue Devils, especially when the competition gets tougher? We're about to find out. But again, you'd rather be Duke, the number 1 overall seed, with that short list of concerns than virtually anybody else in the tournament, not named maybe Arizona, because whatever concerns those other coaches have in the field of 68 are a lot longer and a lot more complicated than John Shire's X factors with the Blue Devils.
Assuming former Syracuse guard and my personal tournament killer one year in the Big East tournament when I was at Cincinnati, Jerry McNamara and Siena, doesn't pull the upset over Duke, they'll either play TCU or they will play Ohio State. Who do you see as giving Duke the better matchup between the Horned Frogs and the Buckeyes?
Probably TCU. I'm not sure TCU has the long-armed 7-footer that Ugo Onyenso provided for UVA to complicate the Cam Boozer part of the equation. Ohio State does have a legitimate 7-footer, but I don't think he's quite as athletic and quick enough as Onyenso and even Johan Grunlow for UVA. So I think Duke is a shoo-in for the Sweet 16 personally. and I would not say that about a lot of teams in this tournament. I'm not picking all 4 seeds to get to the Final Four this year, the way it did happen a year ago. But I'm by far most confident in Arizona and Duke. I will personally be shocked if they're not both in the Sweet 16, and then we'll have to reassess on future shows what do their opponents turn out to be. Because when you're looking at the original Field of 68 bracket, the teams you expect a certain squad to play later doesn't always work out that way. So we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. But I love how Arizona is playing. I love how Duke is playing. It's not that Michigan and Florida aren't great teams as well, but I see a top tier of 2, Duke and Arizona. And man, would that be a super heavyweight tilt if they ended up playing in the national championship game. But again, that's down the road. For now, I don't think the Devils will have trouble with Siena, and I don't think they'd have trouble with either TCU or Ohio State.
Build your insurance coverage like a great team. Strong defense, smart decisions, a clear plan. Off the court, your protection should be just as strong. High Street Insurance and Financial Services gives you a custom off-court game plan built around your life and your budget. Ken Lawson Sr. founded Lawson Insurance in 1974, and today Ken Lawson Jr., Miller Lawson, Michael Lawson, and third-generation Will Lawson are carrying that legacy forward right here in our community as High Street Insurance and Financial Services. From auto, home, and life to commercial coverage, High Street helps you understand your options, close the gaps, and adjust your protection as life changes. Start your insurance game plan today at myhighstreet.com or call 919-846-2090. That's myhighstreet.com on the web, or call us here in Raleigh at 919-846-2090. High Street Insurance and Financial Services, a charter partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. David, let's move now to the other ACC teams that will be in the field of 68. And Virginia comes into March Madness as the number 3 seed in the Midwest region. And they open in Philadelphia against the Raiders of Wright State. The Raiders actually a dog, and Wright State is based in Dayton, named after Orville and Wilbur Wright, who have a first-in-flight connection right here to the Bold North State. Now, if the Cavaliers advance, they'll see either number 6 Tennessee and Hickory native Rick Barnes as the head coach of the Vols, or the winner of SMU and Miami, Ohio's first 4 winner. After pushing Duke in the ACC title game, the Cavaliers feel like one of the ACC teams entering March with some real momentum. What stands out to you about Ryan Odom and what he has built so quickly in Charlottesville? Is it the poise, the balance, or the fact that this team just seems comfortable on the big stage already early in his tenure?
One of the themes we discussed on our shows live from Charlotte was the Cavaliers' depth. And I think that's going to serve them really well in the NCAA tournament, just as it did when they played 3 games in 3 days at the ACC tournament. Here's the reality. Very few teams in the country love both their starting center and their backup center. UVA does. Johann Grunloh from Germany is the 20-year-old international import. He was a little banged up in Charlotte, so he didn't play at his best. But the backup was Ugo Onyenso. If UVA had beaten Duke in that relatively close championship game, I think the backup center, Ugo Onyenso, would have been the ACC tournament MVP. How's that for a backup? We knew he was an elite shot blocker. He had 8 in 1 game in the ACC tournament, but he also exploded for 17 points, in part with the increased playing time he had because of the limited nature of Grunloh as he was battling through some physical issues. Similarly, very few coaches in all of college basketball love both their starting point guard and their backup point guard. Now, sometimes these guys play together, but Dallin Hall, the senior starter, transfer from BYU, physically strong guy, good defender, loves to pass, strong ball handler. You can't get the ball away from him. He's the savvy veteran, poised, composed at all times, loved to get his teammates involved. Chance Mallory is the true freshman from right there in the Charlottesville area who had committed to Tony Bennett as a high school player and long ago, and then obviously followed through to play with Ryan Odom, for Ryan Odom with the hometown Cavaliers. I thought Chance Mallory was one of the half a dozen or so best freshmen in an ACC that was loaded with great freshmen this year. There were a couple years recently where I couldn't find 5 freshmen that I loved so much that I was just dying to put their names on the all-freshman team in my ballot at the end of the year. This year, it felt like there were 10 or 12 or 15 really good freshmen, and I thought Chance Mallory might have been real close to the top 5. So when you love your starting point guard and backup point guard, starting center and backup center, and again, the point guards are sometimes on the court together. You and I also saw Malik Thomas, good three-point shooter, but also beat the Blue Devils off the dribble quite a bit. Sam Lewis, good three-point shooter, also got to the basket against a great defense quite a bit. Jakari White usually comes off the bench. He is an absolute sharpshooter from three-point range. You cannot give that guy an inch. If he gets a good look at the rim from beyond the three-point arc, he is going to make that shot far more often than not. Tess de Ridder was all ACC. The Belgian import, 23-year-old freshman, one of the best half a dozen players in this league. When you add it all up, there's 9 guys that when Ryan Odom looks down at his bench in the preseason buildup or pregame buildup, he likes all 9 guys. He was playing the same 9 guys now. As I said with the Tar Heel breakdown, Hubert Davis can legitimately have confidence in 4 guys right now. Even John Shire at Duke, Mike, given just the up and down nature of the bench players, there are times that he has had confidence, given injuries, in only the top 4 or 5 players at Duke. Ryan Odom has legit confidence in the top 9. And other than Duke, which I definitely have in my Sweet 16 and beyond, UVA is the team I have the second most confidence in among ACC squads in this year's bracket. I like them to get to the Sweet 16. We'll see how the matchups shake down after that. But I think Ryan Odom's first season in Charlottesville is going to be a nice combination of second place finish only to the mighty Blue Devils, second place runner-up finish only to those same number 1 overall Devils at the ACC tournament. And then a Sweet 16 would not only be a nice cherry on top for the Cavaliers, I think once they get to the Sweet 16, depending on what the matchups are, the Cavaliers might still be dangerous then, largely because of that 9-man depth.
Well, David, you're from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. You were just talking about a team from the Commonwealth of Virginia. Now we will zoom over to the other Commonwealth, Kentucky, and we'll talk about the number 6 seed in the East region, the Louisville Cardinals. And they head to Buffalo to face the Bulls of South Florida in their first round game. That game does come with some edge because USF is on a hot streak. And the winner of this game will move into a pod that includes Michigan State and North Dakota State. How do you see Pat Kelsey and Louisville in this bracket? And do the Cardinals feel like a team to you that is on a hot streak right now that could outperform that 6th line if they settle in and can get some momentum going early on in the tournament?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me about Louisville because as I give my pecking order for the 8 ACC teams that are in this year, obviously, again, it starts with Duke, it continues with Virginia, but this is where I kind of stray from the pure seeding because several ACC teams are seeded in that 6, 7, 8 range. And I don't have a lot of confidence in most of them, just to be candid. I do believe in the Louisville Cardinals. And if you told me that there were going to be 3 ACC teams in the Sweet 16, my guess would be Duke and UVA, and coming from a much lower seed, the Louisville Cardinals. Why? I think Pat Kelsey, has had to ride a complicated journey this year. The star freshman point guard, Michael Brown Jr., missed, I think it was 9 straight games at midseason. And I think the Cardinals went only 5-4 in those 9 games. And then his back issues kind of resurfaced. Same guy misses the last 2 regular season games and misses the entire ACC tournament. Now, as with Patrick Gongba at Duke, that was a choice. It was Duke wants Gongba fully healthy or as close to that as possible for the NCAA tournament. So they were willing to keep him in street clothes for the ACC tournament. Same with Michael Brown Jr. You and I saw him courtside, and that guy was chatting with his teammates while they were on the court. He was animated in the Louisville huddles during timeouts and otherwise. He was fully engaged in Louisville's mission. And I think that's a really good sign because he is a freshman. He is projected as an NBA lottery pick. I don't know where his head might be as he's dealing with those back issues and maybe looking forward to the multi-million-dollar payday that awaits him as an NBA lottery pick. But I was impressed that even as I think he stood the entire time because of his back issues. Every other player and manager is seated for the most part. I saw him almost entirely standing during the games we observed at the ACC tournament. I bring him up because he's central to why I believe the Cardinals will be better in the NCAA tournament than they were during, let's call it, a good but not great regular season. They were 23-10, but they were only 11-7 in conference play, which put them in 6th place. And they were one of those lower seeds at the ACC tournament. As a 6th seed in the NCAA tournament, though, I think they're dangerous. Brown is back. He is up and down at times. He can have a really cold shooting night, but man, when he gets on a roll, you can see why the NBA scouts love him so much as a bigger point guard with incredible scoring skills. But they have much more than that. Ryan Conwell was one of the best players in the entire ACC. He's a Xavier transfer. He's a senior. He's one of those dogs, DAWGS, that we were talking about some other teams lacking right now. He is not afraid of the moment. He loves the ball in his hands. He can hit threes. He can beat you off the dribble. He can find teammates for open three-point shots. I love that backcourt. They list Javon Hadley. I think that Louisville lists him as a guard, even though he's 6'7" and does play in the post on defense sometimes. He is a fantastic, call him a glue guy, call him a Swiss Army knife, whatever. He can hit threes. He defends really hard. He's got a lot of dog in him. He can beat you off the dribble. He can find the open man. So you're talking about a backcourt where I haven't even mentioned Isaac McNeely, a guy we saw grow up with the Virginia Cavaliers, one of the best free throw shooters in the league at times, one of the best three-point shooters in the league at times. He's been up and down for the Cardinals. Some of their bigger games, I've seen him have really cold shooting nights, but the guy is consistently around 40% from three-point range. So think about that, Mike. If you have the ball is in the hands of either Michael Brown Jr. or All-ACC Ryan Conwell, or sharpshooter Isaac McNeely, or swingman Javon Hadley, the Cardinals aren't as great in the post as they've been at other times, but Sananda Frew is a nice player. Ali Khalifa is a contributor as well with a lot of experience at the college level. So they need just enough from the post, but March is often, many of these games evolve into backcourt versus backcourt. And I love Pat Kelsey's team in the backcourt, especially when it is healthy. I think it is as healthy as it's going to get. Only Michael could tell you how his back feels. So we'll see if he has any lingering issues along those lines. But if the ACC advances 3 or more teams beyond this first weekend, I think Duke will definitely be one. Virginia probably will be one. And Louisville is my next favorite in terms of having a chance to live on to the Sweet 16 and maybe beyond.
DG Miami lands at a number 7 seed in the West, and they will open in St. Louis against the Missouri Tigers. That is a home game for Mizzou. And if the Canes get through that one, Jay Lucas's likely second-round matchup is either Queens, who we've already talked about, or Purdue. So there's not much easing into this bracket for the University of Miami. They're coming off a strong season. They get one of those classic 7-10 games. It usually feels like it could go either way. What do you make of Miami entering this tournament? They look like a team that could use their experience and confidence to steady itself quickly, or does it feel like one of those matchups where the first 10 minutes of this game is going to tell us a whole lot about their prospects?
Well, first, hats off to Jay Lucas, man. The former Duke assistant coach has built a team and a program quickly. Remember, he had to leave Duke at the end of the regular season, essentially, because he told the Miami folks, if I wait until later in this transfer portal world, I'm not going to have enough time to build a competitive team, and my first team with the Hurricanes is probably going to be a lousy one. Instead, it was unconventional to see him leave Duke when he did, right? I mean, you spend all year with these players and these coaches, and now you got to bail out as they're chasing their biggest dreams. But there's no doubt that difficult decision allowed Jay Lucas to build his program the right way on the right timetable. So he gets the Indiana transfer, Malik Reneau, who's originally a Miami guy. He gets a homecoming of sorts to play for the Hurricanes in his final year of college eligibility, and he turns out to be a first-team All-ACC caliber forward for the Canes. Similarly, he's not going to get Trey Donaldson, the Michigan transfer, out of the portal if he's late to the portal game. Well, he wasn't. So he gets his other most important piece, All-ACC point guard Trey Donaldson, to go with All-ACC forward Malik Reneau. The reason I think the Canes have a chance to make the Sweet 16 starts with those two guys. They also have one of the better freshmen in the ACC in the big fella, Shelton Henderson. Remember, he had committed to the Duke Blue Devils, but when Coach Lucas took off for Miami, Shelton Henderson got out of his letter with Duke and signed with the Hurricanes instead. He was maybe one of the top 6, 7, 8 freshmen in the ACC. Big-bodied guy, physical, can defend multiple positions. Not a three-point shooter, but dangerous, closer to the basket, and another very important piece that Jay Lucas has had to work with. My concern with Miami, and it'll come back to haunt them at some point, as it did at the ACC tournament. But again, they're a candidate for the Sweet 16, given that road that you outlined. They like True Washington, their veteran guard. They love Ernest Uday, their senior center. He's kind of like Ugo Onyenso of Virginia. He will defend you to the death. He will block your shots. He will support the defensive boards. He will be available for alley-oops at the offensive end if the guards get too much of the defensive attention. He's unselfish, Uday, so he wants to let those guards kind of run the show, and he wants to be a role player as a senior. That's what his role will be as a professional someday. So he's been, cultivating that after other stops in college basketball. So I love the Miami starting five is the bottom line. I wouldn't trade their starting five for hardly any in the ACC. When they go to their bench, and sometimes Washington comes off the bench, they're just not sure what they're going to get. And it caught up to them at the ACC tournament. They just didn't have enough firepower to get through to the latter rounds, or to the championship game, I should say. But how far can you ride 2 superstars and 3 pretty good members of your supporting cast? If Noam Dovrat or Timo Malavets or Dante Allen or any of those other guys can rise to the occasion, then that improves the Hurricanes' chances. But eventually you need more than 4 or 5 guys, and that's why I can't project the Hurricanes. Best case scenario, I'll say a Sweet 16. And again, if that happens, we'll reevaluate whatever matchup they got at that point. But regardless of how this season ends, man, it is a fantastic, impressive start for Jay Lucas's tenure with the Miami Hurricanes.
We have a lot more ACC teams to talk about here in 2026 than we did last year, which makes this Bacon and Basketball Month so much fun. Remember to go to Yahoo, Bracket Mayhem, and fill out your brackets. Go to our X page. We have all of the instructions on how to join our bracket contest, brought to you by NC Pork, right there on our X page, pinned as the top post. And the next team we're going to talk about here in our big NCAA tournament preview outline is coached by a former coach here in North Carolina. We're talking, of course, about Brad Brownell, former coach at UNC Wilmington, now with Clemson. And the Tigers enter as the 8th seed in the South region. And they'll be headed to Hillsborough County in Tampa against number 9 Iowa. It's one of those games, again, where the seed line tells the story. 2 teams that look pretty evenly matched, with the likely reward being a second-round shot, lucky them, against Todd Golden and the defending national champion Florida Gators. What stands out to you, DG, about Clemson going into this tournament? And do the Tigers feel dangerous to you? Can they make a run towards the Final Four?
I don't think so is the short answer. And I don't love saying that out loud because I have tremendous respect for Brad Brownell, who's one of the best coaches in the ACC, period. What he's done at Clemson. I think if you listed the 6 greatest teams in the history of Clemson basketball, Brad Brownell is personally responsible for 2 or 3 of them. We've seen him make NCAA tournament runs. Couple reasons I don't think it's in the cards this year. One, whereas the Tigers are brilliant defensively, and I mean fantastic, they just don't have enough offensive firepower. We saw it all season long. It caught up to them as we had predicted it would at the ACC tournament. Credit to them for eking out that victory over the Tar Heels after that late flurry by UNC. Credit to them for advancing to the semifinals. But especially against a quality defensive team, when Clemson crosses half court, you're just not sure where the buckets are going to come from. RJ Godfrey is a heck of a player. Big, strong, muscular, tough, smart. He can get you double digits. Sometimes he can even get you a double in points and rebounds. But the rest of that roster is unpredictable offensively, and it's especially troublesome that Clemson has lost its starting center, Carter Welling, for the season. He hurt his knee in Charlotte. We saw him come off the court in tears. It looked like he knew it was a serious injury as he emotionally came off the court with the assistance of two of the Clemson staff members. That guy is one of the better big man defenders in the ACC, former Mountain West Conference Defensive Player of the Year. He's also a pretty good offensive player that, assuming he stays at Clemson, I look forward to what he could deliver next year for the Tigers. But the bottom line is, to make a run to the Sweet 16, especially in that mini bracket you described, you need some weapons offensively. It's just not on that roster. So credit to Clemson for, I think, squeezing as much as they have out of that roster. It's not that Brad Brownell underperformed. You might even argue that he overperformed, getting the 5 seed in the ACC tournament and tying UNC in the ACC standings for 4th place. Carolina and Miami and Virginia and Duke all had more talent than the Clemson Tigers did. Yet Clemson finished in that top tier. They didn't have as much talent as they have had in the portal era under Brad Brownell, and I think that is the reason for their ceiling. But as I said with Jay Lucas at Miami, however this season ends for Clemson, I think Brad Brownell deserves credit for squeezing everything out of this team that it had to offer.
And our final ACC team that we'll talk about right here is SMU, and their road starts in Dayton as the 11th seed in the Midwest region, where they will face Miami, Ohio in the first 4. Now, this is a game everybody is excited to see. Man, Travis Steele and the Red Hawks made it to the tournament, even though they blew it in Cleveland at the MAC tournament in the first round. The title went to Travis Steele's stepbrother, John Gross, and the Akron Zips. Let's go Zips. I spent 5 years there. Love the fact that the blue and gold are in the tournament. But for SMU, if they win in Dayton, they move on to Philly to face number 6 Tennessee. So this is one of those paths where the tournament really begins before the bracket even fully gets going. What do you think about the kind of path that SMU has? And is Dayton more of a burden because of the travel and the turnaround? Or can there be a benefit to them, like we think there could be for NC State, to set them up for great success here in the early portion of the tournament?
Yeah, I think the main things to remember here about SMU are, one, it's an offensively brilliant team. Andy Enfield has run fun teams to watch since his days at Florida Gulf Coast and at Southern Cal, and he has continued that tradition with SMU. For those who haven't seen a lot of the Mustangs, Boopie Miller is a handful at point guard. He's one of the quickest players in all of college basketball. He can hit the 3. He's a good free throw shooter. He's one of the leading assist men in this league, and he's actually pretty efficient for a guy who has the ball in his hands as much as he does. There's a lot of high volume guys out there that are low efficiency. Boopie Miller is both high volume and high efficiency. I thought he was one of the half a dozen best players in the ACC. And if everybody is healthy, remember that Boopie Miller has senior guards on both sides of him. So it's Jaron Pierre Jr. on one side, and if he's healthy, you heard him mentioned by the NCAA Selection Committee chairman when asked why the Mustangs got in over teams like Texas and Auburn, or not Texas, Auburn and others, Oklahoma and others. BJ Edwards is a really good two-way player for SMU. He's been out with an injury lately. Well, the committee said one of the reasons SMU barely got in is that B.J. Edwards is expected to return. Andy Enfield said he's expected to return. That three-headed backcourt monster of Boopie Miller, Jaron Pierre Jr., and B.J. Edwards, they're all seniors. They've all played a ton of basketball. They've all played a ton of basketball together by this point, even though Pierre is new this year. Miller and Edwards were with Andy Enfield last year as well, as SMU became an ACC member for the first time almost 2 years ago at this point. They also have the talented freshman power forward Jaden Toombs. They have the veterans international center in Yigatolu. They're really hard to stop. One fascinating thing to watch here is, I think, just as Miami, Ohio has a chip on its shoulder, because some people are saying, they didn't play anybody. Yeah, it's impressive to do what they did, but lots of teams could have beaten up on that schedule. Miami, Ohio has a chip on its shoulder. I think SMU has a chip on its shoulder as well, because they are the last team in. They have had people question how they've performed away from home. There are obvious criticisms about SMU's defense, which is not great, much like the Wolfpack we described earlier. Offensive firepower to scare or surprise almost anybody? Yes, for both SMU and NC State. Defensive problems that might be the reason for an early exit? Yes, for both the Wolfpack and the Mustangs. So which way it'll go is a guessing game. I don't think either state or SMU, like a Clemson and some of the other lower seeds, I don't think they're legitimate threats to get all the way to the Sweet 16. But in the case of the Wolfpack and the Mustangs, we get to see them earlier than the others. We get to see them in sort of a national spotlight. There's no other game going on Tuesday night at that time. So I'm looking forward to both teams' opportunities, because they're good enough to win. And in both cases, they put the amount of firepower offensively out there that is worth the price of admission or the price of your time watching on TV.
Is it bad for the ACC basketball brand to have two teams in the first four?
It's not nice. Let me give you my quick, broader overview. The ACC did place 8 teams in the Big Dance this year. And that's a positive sign, right? The league is deeper than it has been in recent years, when it got only 4 or 5 bids to the NCAA tournament. I do like to remind people that even in this stretch where the ACC has been criticized a lot, they never stopped sending teams to the Final Four. It was both Carolina and Duke in 2022. It was Miami in 2023 under Jim Larinaga. It was NC State in 2024 under Kevin Keatts. And then it was Duke again, this time under John Shire in 2025, just last year. But the combination of quality and quantity just has not been there for the ACC overall since that amazing run last decade, when, remember, Duke won it all under Mike Krzyzewski in 2015. 2 years later, Carolina wins it all under Roy Williams in 2017. And then 2 years after that, UVA wins it all under Tony Bennett in 2019. And Mike, that 2019 season offered the best of the ACC in men's basketball. And I am intrigued to see whether they could do something similar this year. To refresh everybody's recollections, the Cavaliers ultimately cut down the nets in 2019, but they were joined in the Sweet 16 by 4 additional ACC teams. Coach K took Duke all the way to the Elite 8 on that second weekend. Roy Williams, Leonard Hamilton, and Buzz Williams were also in the Sweet 16 with UNC and Florida State and Virginia Tech, respectively, back in 2019. When any single league has 5 of the Sweet 16 by itself, 2 of the Elite 8 by itself, and that same league produces the national champion, the way the ACC did all of those things in 2019, it just does not get much better than that. I do not personally believe, like in my bracket, I will not have 5 ACC teams in the Sweet 16 this year. I do think the Big 12 is a better league. We'll see how the rest shakes out, because, the SEC had even more bids. The Big 10 had as many bids or more bids. And so I don't know if it'll shake out in that peak kind of way, the way 2019 was peak ACC basketball. But I certainly like Duke to get there. I definitely like number 3 seed Virginia to get there. We discussed how and why I like number 6 seed Louisville to get to the Sweet 16. And then who knows who might join them, right? We went through the rest of the possibilities. Some we like more than others. but it's a step forward for the ACC as a whole to have the number one overall seed, to have 8 invited teams. Remember, each invitation is worth millions of dollars, and each victory once you get there is worth more millions of dollars. So it's a financial boost for the league. It's an image boost for the league. It's a more positive narrative for the league. And I think those positives all outweigh whatever people might interpret as seeing both SMU and NC State in the first 4. That's kind of a small negative in my eyes amidst a whole lot of much bigger positives.
Well, let's accentuate on the negative a little bit and talk about 3 ACC schools that don't have head coaches right now. And that coaching carousel is spinning, and the ACC has 3 vacancies right now: Syracuse, Georgia Tech, and Boston College. Now, those are not 3 equal jobs. You and I had a lot of time to talk about that driving to and from the Queen City. Syracuse still has the biggest brand in the most basketball history. They also have a brand new athletics director in Brian Blair coming over from Toledo. So Georgia Tech, they have the Atlanta market and some real upside right there, but that has not been an easy place to win consistently. In Boston College, there's Boston College. It might be the toughest of the 3 just because of where basketball sits and just the importance of college sports in Beantown. That is a Celtics town. That is a Bruins town. That is a Red Sox town. It is not a big-time college basketball town. So when you look, David Glenn, at these 3 coaching vacancies right now in the Atlantic Coast Conference, which one is the best job? Which one is the hardest sell? And which one could be sneaky good if they get the right coach? And then if we want to broaden it out a little bit, why don't you give us maybe your number 1 job that's currently open right now nationally, if it's not one of those 3?
Well, Syracuse is the best job of those 3. They have already branded themselves, thanks to Jim Boeheim and Carmelo Anthony and others, as a national championship program. Georgia Tech can't say that. Boston College can't say that in the sport of men's basketball. Boston College is the hardest sell among those 3, to use your phrase. We know that Bill O'Brien in football had a lot of complaints after a rough start at BC about resources and the approach to name, image, likeness, and the approach to revenue sharing. And they have said at Boston College that they're going to upgrade those things in football. I assume they're planning to upgrade them as well in men's basketball. But it is a small private college and one of the tougher places to win in the 18-team Atlantic Coast Conference, given resources, given track records historically, given the pattern of sending players to the NBA, for example, just as one additional thing that recruits and prospects look for in any given program. So Georgia Tech would be the in-between job to me, Syracuse the higher caliber, Boston College the lower caliber. But it's up to these athletic directors and university presidents to find great fits, whether you have the best sales pitch or the worst sales pitch or the more complicated resources or the overflowing resources, right? We live in a world where you can have the most resources and hire the wrong guy, or have the least resources and hire the right guy, and you just change the trajectory of your program with a few smart decisions. At Syracuse, by the way, and Mike, you and I had this conversation in the car on Sunday morning, and it's amazing how things can change in 24 hours. So as we post this show on our popular YouTube channel, anything I'm about to say could change in the next 24 hours. So I hope folks will just remember that there's a timestamp on everything we say. Things change that quickly on the coaching carousel. But I want to throw out there that given the AD change at Syracuse, that obviously helps a lot, right? Nobody wants to talk to John Wildhack. All due respect to John, who's been a good AD and a long-time impressive person around college sports. Nobody wants to talk to AD John Wildhack at Syracuse knowing that he's already announced that he's moving on this summer. So they did hire Toledo's Brian Blair. They did announce that publicly, and that's good because then candidates know, well, this is the person I'll be working for. This is the person that I need to start a relationship with if I'm going to take the Syracuse basketball job. I believe, again, as we speak, I believe that Syracuse has its guy. They want Brian Hodgson of South Florida. He's only in his late 30s. He has been the American Conference 2026 Coach of the Year, and that's in only his 3rd year as a head coach and his 1st year with the Golden Bulls. He was 2 years at Arkansas State in the Sun Belt, where he got a regular season title one of his years there. He has been at South Florida with the regular season title and the NCAA tournament bid that came with the auto bid. This is a guy, Brian Hodgson, who worked under Nate Oates at both Buffalo and at Alabama in the SEC. Now, Brian Hodgson has roots in upstate New York. He worked at Buffalo. He's from the Nate Oates coaching tree, and there's at least preliminary interest. And who knows, by the time folks see our show, maybe he won't be announced until after South Florida is done playing this season. But one potential complication is that Providence of the Big East is also open. Providence has Brian Hodgson on its short list as well. Syracuse is a better job than Providence, in my opinion, and probably most others' opinions. Providence has already fired Kim English. But Brian Hodgson, late 30s, good recruiter, impressive but short track record as a head coach. He could be the new guy at Syracuse as early as a week from now. In terms of the other jobs, I'll just point out that at Georgia Tech, he's not the only candidate. And again, this could change 24 hours from now. But the Troy head coach, Scott Cross, early 50s, consistent winner at UT Arlington. But he had only one NCAA trip there. They got fired. They got tired of good, but not good enough. So they actually fired Scott Cross in 2018. A lot of people criticized them for that because they knew Cross was a good coach. Scott Cross has quickly built Troy into a consistent winner in the Sun Belt over the past 7 seasons, 5 straight years of 20 or more victories, back-to-back Sun Belt titles, and NCAA tournament trips in 2025 and 2026. So he has a longer track record, obviously high-level recent success. He's only in his early 50s. And oh, by the way, Georgia Tech's current associate athletic director, Brent Jones, is the guy who hired Scott Cross to be the Troy head coach 7 years ago. So there's an inside behind the curtains connection directly between Georgia Tech's administration, headed by Ryan Alpert, the AD there, and one of the candidates, again, not the only candidate, Scott Cross of Troy. I've heard Casey Alexander of Belmont's name attached to that, Bob Ritchie from Furman attached to that Georgia Tech job as well. And lastly, quickly on Boston College, remember that BC's AD is Blake James, who came from the Miami Hurricanes. Blake James knew, of course, among others, Jim Larrañaga, former head coach of the Hurricanes, very well. We know that Boston College has interviewed at least 5 people. And again, any of this could change. Somebody could be hired. Somebody could drop off at any time. Son of Jim Larrañaga, Jay Larrañaga, has been interviewed. He's the former Bowling Green star player. He played internationally for more than a decade. As a coach, he's been an assistant with the Boston Celtics for a long time and currently with the LA Clippers in the NBA. He's in his early 50s. He would love a head coaching job in major college basketball. So maybe because of the whisper of his own dad into the ear of Blake James, Jay Larrañaga has gotten an interview. Another guy that is well known in ACC country, Jerry McNamara, head coach at Siena, has them in the big dance. He's only been there for 2 years. They were 3rd in the regular season in that league. Jerry McNamara is only 42 years old. He, of course, was one of Carmelo Anthony's teammates on that Syracuse national championship team under Jim Boeheim. Whether he's ready for an ACC caliber job is a matter of debate, but he has had an interview. Eric Olin of New Mexico has interviewed with the Eagles. This is his first season with the Lobos. They were 3rd in the Mountain West during the regular season. He was successful bringing UC San Diego from the D2 level to the D1 level, the way Grant Leonard has done that for Queens University here in North Carolina in recent years. Eric Konkol of Tulsa is on BC's list, and Joe Gallo, who's a local guy. Like, you could drive from the Boston College campus to the Merrimack campus. They're that close to each other. Joe Gallo, he played at Merrimack. He brought his same story. He brought his own alma mater from the D2 level into the D1 ranks. He's been near the top of that MAC league every year, MAAC. He's the 2026 MAAC Coach of the Year. only 46 years old, good personality, good recruiter, impressive track record as a head coach right there in the greater Boston area. As you said, Patriots town, Celtics town, Red Sox town, Bruins town. It takes a creative angle of one type or another for the Eagles to thrive in basketball. But even in my time covering the ACC, I saw Al Skinner back in the day have the Eagles really, really relevant. When they first joined the ACC, those were some tough Boston College basketball teams. Now, obviously, they have been the worst program in the league for more than a decade at this point. But finding the right guy can change that trajectory. Those are the names that I'm aware of in that mix. And Mike, as we speak, I'm trying to remember. I'm so engrossed in breaking down the bracket. You asked me the most prominent vacancy in college basketball right now. And I know there are dozens of vacancies. I'm just not sure if I'm forgetting one. I don't want to misanswer your question. I'm not sure. Syracuse is a good one, but my brain is focused on the 68 teams still playing much more than it is on. I'm following the coaching carousel, as I just outlined, for the ACC programs and even for some vacancies here across North Carolina. I can't say I'm watching the rest of the nation as much because I am mesmerized by these games we're about to see in the NCAA tournament.
And there are going to be some big jobs that pop open here in the next few weeks. Some people are just waiting in the lurch. I was following one specific job opening that has been rumored to come open, and I was told by a coach within the last few hours that the next 36 hours will be key for them. And one name to keep in mind for that Boston College job out there is a former assistant of ours at Towson University. He's been in the ACC before at Louisville. We're talking, of course, about Luke Murray, the son of comedian Bill Murray, but he is an incredible basketball coach, longtime assistant coach with Danny Hurley up at the University of Connecticut, and incredible recruiting chops in Boston, in New York, in Philly, in Baltimore. This guy knows the Eastern Corridor, and he can coach ball. He gets along with the players too. But before we get out of here, let's make sure that everybody signs up for the North Carolina Sports Network Bacon and Basketball Bracket Challenge, year number 3 this year, moving to Yahoo. And you could win free bacon for a year from NC Pork, plus cool prizes from our new expanded partnership with Stitch Golf. Just use the group ID 14348. That's 14348, or as you would look at it from NASCAR parlance, 1 Richard Petty, Jimmy Johnson, and you can get your bracket ready for some prizes. And you can also come out and watch games with us. It will be David Glenn sometimes, it'll be Kerry Keating sometimes, it might just be me, but we're going to be out at Emilio's and Sammy's this week, starting with the Wolfpack game on Tuesday night from the First Four in Dayton. Will also be over there on Thursday and Friday during the day. So come on over. Emilio's Italian Restaurant, Sammy's Tap and Grill, great partners of ours right here on the North Carolina Sports Network. David Glenn, it is finally here, March Madness. This is a heck of a start to our coverage. We'll have more shows coming up throughout the week with Kerry Keating, who is otherwise detained today because he is managing not only some teams that he's coaching, but he's also got a pretty dynamic analytics business that works with college basketball called Layup, and he's busy with that right now. But DG, man, let's go have some fun and watch some ball tomorrow night from the First Four.
I'm excited to watch those games at Emilio's, a place I've been to many times, Sammy's as well. Look forward to seeing you in person again after we spent so much time together in Charlotte at the ACC tournament. This is one of my favorite times of the year. We're going to be writing a lot, Mike. In fact, all 8 ACC teams, plus High Point and Queens, have as thorough a breakdown at ncsportsnetwork.com as you will find anywhere in the country. And there's a lot of bracketologists that are Johnny-come-latelys and are going to try to throw something down on those what would that be, 10 total schools. We've covered them the whole season. In some cases, we've covered them for 4 decades. We have historical backdrops. We have statistics for this year's rotation players. We have narratives that describe how they got from there to here. In all 10 of those cases, the 8 ACC schools that got bids, the 2 in-state programs beyond the ACC that got bids, You might not know a lot about Queens or High Point. We break it all down for you, player by player, story by story, and it's all right there at our website, ncsportsnetwork.com, which also, of course, has links. If you ever forget how to find us, our on-demand audio, the David Glenn Show podcast, or our YouTube channel, we make it real easy for you. Visit ncsportsnetwork.com. You click the word watch to go to YouTube. You click the word listen to go to the audio. You click the word read to find our articles. So that's as simple as it gets. But remember that Grand Central station, ncsportsnetwork.com.
This is the North Carolina Sports Network. From the high country to the Outer Banks, on courts, fields, and fairways, we tell the stories of the bold North State. Follow us on social media at the NC Sports Net. We're the exclusive home of The David Glenn Show, coach-driven analysis of football and basketball. A look at the past with This Was Then, Inside NIL with Court Vision, the North Carolina Sports Awards, aka the Pineys, and the Old North State Tailgate, where we are on the ground at North Carolina's top events. Our foundational partner is NC Pork, raising the bacon, raising the bar. Telling the stories of the bold North State. Experience matters. This is NCSN, the North Carolina Sports Network.